Hello Year 10, this is our final lesson on Macbeth, at least this year. Of course we will be revisiting it next year, looking at some themes, but I would like to finish off the poetry, the literature after this. So this is Macbeth, the end. On the right hand side I've got a little checklist of what we're going to be up to in today's lesson. So we're going to start off with a learning review quiz on teens, and I'm going to give you a summary of Act 5. I'm going to get you to read it. You can access that on the internet or in your own copies of the text. And then we're going to explore just a few scenes. And finally, who is to blame? So, first things first, what I'd like you to do if you haven't already is to go onto Teens and access the weekly Retrieval quiz. It's based on last week's work. So that was language questions 1, 2 and 3, which is kind of hard to put into a quiz. So I've just kind of done a recap on techniques. I'll be able to see when you've done it, so if you need to pause the video now, do so. Fabulous. So here is a summary. You will see that throughout this, I've put Act 5 scenes 2 to 9. Now, I'm not even convinced that there is a scene 9, but in my copy of the text, there certainly is. Yours might actually finish at scene 8. But I'm pretty sure they'll say the same thing. It's just how the publisher decided to split them up. So do not panic if you do not have a scene 9. It's all fine. What I'm going to get you to do, please, is either storyboard or make notes of this summary so that you know exactly what happens in Act 5. We're not going to spend an awful lot of time on every single scene because I think that's the point. Shakespeare's deliberately made Act 5 really choppy to build tension because Malcolm's going to finally come and restore his place on the throne, and it'll be Macbeth's downfall, so it's this constant chopping and changing between the rightful heir to the throne and then this tyrannical ruler Macbeth. So, remember last time, Act 5, Scene 1 was Lady Macbeth going mad and compulsively washing her hands during her sleep. Now at this point, Scenes 2 onwards, Macbeth is ridiculously confident about the battle because he knows that a forest can't move. So the witch's prophecy that Birnam Wood will move, he knows it can't actually happen, so he's fine. However, what he doesn't know is that Malcolm has the genius idea of ordering each soldier to cut a branch and carry it in front of him as camouflage, so Birnam Wood, of course, does in fact move. In the meantime, Lady Macbeth dies off stage, which is fairly underwhelming considering how central a character she's been throughout. I suppose it's almost the final part of her decline. She doesn't even get this kind of heroic death on stage. She kind of just, it's implied that she jumps off the side of the castle, we don't really know. And when Macbeth finds out about this, he's kind of nihilistic about it. He doesn't really care. He basically says, she should have died at some point anyway. And it all seems quite bleak for a while for Macbeth. And at this point he's told that Birnam Wood appears to have uprooted itself and is advancing towards Dunsinane. He's kind of concerned, but then he's like, nope, remember the next prophecy can only be killed by a man who's not born of woman, and that's everyone, so pretty sure I'll be alright. However, when Macbeth and Macduff finally come to face on the battlefield, Macduff finally reveals that he was born via cesarean, and that is when Macbeth realises that the witches have tricked him and it's all been a massive lie. So Macduff kills Macbeth and natural order is restored because Malcolm is proclaimed the new King of Scotland as he should have been from the start. So what I'm going to ask you to do is pause it here, take notes on this summary, and then you're going to need to read the rest of Act 5. And I know that's a pretty tricky ask. A, as it's a play, and B, as it's Shakespeare, but you can access it via SparkNotes and it will have the modern translation right next to it, but it will really help your understanding, and the more you see Shakespearean language, the easier it gets. So once you've written the summary and you've read through Act 5, come back here and watch the rest of the video. Okay. So, one section that we're going to explore in a little bit more depth is Act 5, Scene 5, and this is when Macbeth hears that his wife is dead. He knows that she's been having trouble, people have come to him and said, I think she's really ill, she's doing weird stuff, and Macbeth's like, I'm going to fix it. He doesn't really care at this point, and this is his reaction when he's told that the love of his life, Lady Macbeth, is dead. So here's the Shakespearean, and on the right I've managed to squeeze in the modern translation. He just says, "She should have died hereafter. There would have been a time for such a word. Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps in this petty pace from day to day, to the last syllable of recorded time, and all our yesterdays have lighted fools the way to dusty death. Out, brief candle. Life is but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage and then is heard no more. It's a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing." So this is a spectacularly bleak response from Macbeth. He seems to have almost given up at this point, which is very unlike him. We're used to seeing this ambitious, ruthless Macbeth, and here he just seems depressed. So the first thing I'd like you to do is to summarise the meaning of Macbeth's speech, and you can use modern translation to make that a little bit easier. And I'd like you to think about why Macbeth responds with such indifference to the death of his wife. Do you think he would have always responded that way, or do you think it's specifically at this point in the play that Macbeth is unable to demonstrate or to even feel any emotions at this point? Why do you think he responds like this? For number 3, I've asked you to think about the effect of the repetition of tomorrow and what it tells us about Macbeth's state of mind. So he says tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow, and it's just that monotony. Everything seems the same, nothing's different, and it's a fairly bleak image yet again. He moves on to kind of use these metaphors. So out, brief candle when talking about life, and that life's a poor player, which is an actor who struts and frets and then is heard of no more. It's a tale told by an idiot, signifying nothing. Effectively, he's telling us that life is pointless. There's no point to it anymore. And think about how much this juxtaposes his character in earlier scenes. Earlier in the play, he's willing to do absolutely anything to get the throne. And now that he has it, he knows that his time is coming to an end, and there's this almost false confidence that nothing can hurt him. And yet he's still behaving nihilistically. So we see quite a bit of depth to Macbeth's character here, a bit of development. Number 5, very similar. We know that he's kind of accepted that death is a possibility, even though he doesn't think anyone can actually kill him, and that he thinks life is pointless at this moment. And finally, on this section, as an audience, what do we learn about Macbeth through these short glimpses into his soul? Think about how he appears to outsiders versus his inner turmoil, if you like. And really think about Shakespeare's intentions here. How is he developing this character? So if you need to pause the tape here whilst you do your work, do so now. Also, tape, how old am I? Okay, so this section I've had to really squeeze on, so sorry it's not very aesthetically appealing, but it's the fight between Macbeth and Macduff. I tried to learn Scottish. I googled how to do an accent, but it keeps turning Irish, and my Irish keeps turning kind of this really offensive Eastern European. So I'm just going to read it normally for your entertainment, really, more than anything else, and then we'll talk about the activities. So whilst Macbeth is on his own, he realises he's got to fight. It's, in my copy, the penultimate scene. In yours, it might be the final scene. And he says, "Why should I play the Roman fool and die on mine own sword? Whilst I see lives, the gashes do better upon them." And when he says Roman fool and die upon my own sword, he's saying, I'm not just going to commit suicide. He kind of knows that this isn't going to play out well for him. But he says, no, I'm going to fight. So we see a glimpse of that old Macbeth back again. And at this point, Macduff comes in. Now remember, Macbeth ordered the assassination of Macduff's entire family. Like, for no apparent reason. They weren't a particular threat. He just felt like it. And Macduff says, "Turn, hellhound, turn." And this is almost a really offensive slur. You've got a reference to hell. He's dehumanising Macbeth, and it shows his anger. And Macbeth responds like this. He says, "Of all men else I have avoided thee, but get thee back. My soul is too much charged with blood of thine already." It's almost a sense of remorse here. He feels guilty for having kind of taken away Macduff's family. He's asking him to leave. He doesn't want to fight him. But obviously Macduff will not back down. He says, I have no words. My voice is in my sword. Thou bloodier villain than terms can give thee out. Almost no words can describe Macbeth for how tyrannical and disgusting he's been as a human being. And they fight. Macbeth says to him, Thou losest labour. As easy mayest thou the entrenchant air with thy keen sword impress his maiden bleed. Let fall thy blade on vulnerable crests. I bear a charmed life, which must not yield to one of woman born. And Macbeth is so incredibly confident here. He's basically telling Macduff he's wasting his time. He might as well be stabbing the air because Macbeth is protected. He bears a charmed life. So that arrogance is emerging again, that ambition. And here is when Macduff reveals that he was in fact born by a cesarean. He says, Despair thy charm, and let the angel whom thou still hast served tell thee, Macduff was from his mother's womb untimely ripped. And at this point, Macbeth realises the witch's treachery. They've tricked him. He says, Accursed be that tongue that tells me so, for it hath cowed my better part of man. And be these juggling fiends no more believed, that palter with us in a double sense, that keep the word of promise to our ear, and break it to our hope. I'll not fight with thee. And obviously we know they do. But what I'd like you to look at is here. So what's happening in this scene? Macbeth and Macduff are confronting one another. Who do you think is in control? So one way you can look at this is who speaks the most, although it looks fairly even. But who is the puppet master, if you like? Who is controlling the scene here between those two characters? We've spoken about the connotations of hellhound. We've spoken about when Macbeth realises that the witches have just completely deceived him. We know here that when Macbeth says, I bear a charmed life, his hubristic nature is demonstrated. And we've talked about hubris right at the beginning of the year. It's that idea that pride is going to be your ultimate weakness. Pride will cause your downfall. And it's Macbeth's arrogance here that reveals his hamartia. And then you've got this simile used by Macbeth when he says here about him, basically Macduff might as well stab the air. And how, I suppose you've got Shakespeare using dramatic irony here because, or is it dramatic irony? Do we know about Macduff yet? Well, he's using irony anyway because we're literally going to see in the next piece of dialogue that Macduff was born by a caesarean. So if you need to pause the tape now, do so and complete those activities. Alright, final slide. Again, in my text, it's calling itself scene 9. In yours, it might just be 8. Do not panic either way, the same thing happens. So, Macbeth, excellent. Macduff comes in carrying Macbeth's head. And he says, Hail, King, for though thou art, behold where stands the usurper's cursed head. The time is free. I see thee compassed with thy kingdom's pearl, that speak my salutation in their minds, whose voices I desire aloud with mine. Hail, King of Scotland. And they all say, Hail, King of Scotland, and it's delightful. And Malcolm, our now King of Scotland, says, We shall not spend a large expense of time before we reckon with your several loves, and make us even with you. My thanes and kinsmen henceforth be earls, the first for ever Scotland in such an honour named. What's more to do, which would be planted newly with the time, is calling home our exiled friends abroad, that fled for snares of watchful tyranny, producing forth the cruel ministers of this dead butcher and his fiend-like queen, who as 'tis thought by self and violent hands took off her life. This, and what needful else that calls upon us by the grace of grace, we will perform in measure, time and place. So thanks to all at once, and to each one, whom we invite to see us crowned at Scone or Scone, the time-old argument. And then it ends. So what's happening in this scene? Malcolm is being crowned king, as is right. Secondly, what's a usurper? So that's someone that takes the throne that doesn't deserve it, and it tells us what literally the whole of Scotland thought about Macbeth's rule. He wasn't a popular ruler. And Malcolm here describes Macbeth as a butcher and Lady Macbeth as a fiend-like queen. So we know that's fairly kind of emotive imagery. But in your opinion, who's more to blame for the events that transpire in the play? Him or her? Or the witches? Or fate? Who is most to blame? The final act of Macbeth is structured differently. We spoke about this at the beginning of the video. I suppose it is a video. That doesn't make me too old, does it? Anyway, these scenes are very short compared to the rest of the play, and we think it's to build tension, but why else might Shakespeare have done this? And to what extent do you think Macbeth is a moral play? So do you think justice has been served at its conclusion? Do we actually feel any sympathy for Macbeth in the end? I think I kind of feel sorry for him that he was tricked by those witches, but equally, had it not been for his arrogance, he seemed to only like the prophecies when it suited him. I don't know, it's your opinion. Now, the final section here. We know this. Fleance escaped his murder earlier in the play, meaning that the prophecy about Banquo's children could still come true. So remember, the witches said that Banquo would be father to a line of kings. In fact, this prophecy is the only prophecy that remains unfulfilled by the end of the play. Now, why do you think this is? Top tip. People believed that King James, the first King of Scotland, was somehow related to Banquo, so it's almost Shakespeare kind of tipping his hat at the legitimacy of King James's rule. But that is that. Now, I know that a lot of you will be thinking, oh, that feels like we really rushed through Act 5 and I don't know any of the things. Please do not worry. You know as much as you need to know for now. We are going to revisit this next year. However, if you would like to have any more work on Macbeth, feel free to use GCSE Pod. Feel free to email me. I can give you some articles to have a look at. But you are done and dusted. So I will see you next time. Goodbye!